Hello and welcome to Design Chat, the best live design discussion on the internet. I'm your host, Ryan McGovern. On Twitter, I'm at Hoopajube. Today is July 3rd, 2012, Tuesday. Tomorrow's July 4th. That's why we're not doing our regular Wednesday show. So welcome to the show. And I'd also like to welcome Doug Bartow of ID29 Golf Clap. What's going on?
How are you?
Good. Saying hi in the chat room to Maggie Moore. What's going on? Good to see you. And Shempton Alive. Good to have you back. So usually we kick off the show with having our guests do a brief introduction for people who are not familiar with you or your work. Who are you? What do you do? And why do you do it?
Okay. My name is Doug Bartow. I'm a co-founder of ID29 here in Troy, New York. We're a small kind of a boutique design studio, about 9 years old, and we have 10 people working for us. We love what we do, so we tend to do that most of the time, and really pleased to be here.
Cool.
As far as client work, I mean, we have a variety of different business spaces we work in. We like to mix it up a little bit. I was always told as a design student that you have to specialize and you have to do one or two things and do them really well. And I always shunned that idea, and I always wanted to do what I wanted to do. So we've had some great fortune, and we've been able to work with some great clients over the years, and in a bunch of different business spaces, a bunch of different organizations and businesses, and kind of keep it new and fresh. And it's the kind of thing that you go to bed thinking about, and you wake up first thing in the morning, with fresh ideas for. So you're not always here at the studio designing things, but we've made it. The culture, I think, strong enough here that we're constantly thinking about it. So we're driven to succeed, and we really love what we're working on.
I'd like to remind the audience that you guys can ask questions, and we're going to start taking your questions about halfway through the chat. And you can do that by clicking on the Ask a Question button on the red button on the right side of your screen, and you can either type it in, or if you've got a webcam, you can get on camera and actually be part of the conversation. So I please encourage you guys to do so. Doug, I think that it's really interesting that you mentioned that you go against the idea of specializing in one type of design. What are some, one type of focus of, or business practice of design? What are some of the businesses that you've been involved in that you never would have guessed when you started out that you would, be working with?
I think when you cast a wide net, kind of like we do with our own promotional efforts, and you continually kind of prime the pump and try and get people to notice what you're doing, or maybe get a personal referral from a client you've worked with. If you're small and you're good at what you do, you can be somewhat curatorial with regard to who you work with. So we've had some clients from solopreneurs who are starting businesses up to multi-billion-dollar conglomerates who are large software companies who can keep the lights on, and we try and do interesting, creative work for them. At the same time, sometimes there's a lot of production work involved with that. So we try not to have too much work at any time in that realm, so that we're not a production house, and we're continuing with design and creative work. So a good mix, I think. We had the great fortune of, through just some personal friendships, working with Steve Case, the founder of AOL, in the first year that we were open as a business in 2004, and did some work for his foundation, his personal foundation, as well as a business venture that he launched in 2004 called Revolution. Mm-hmm. 2007, we were the creative agency selected by Scholastic Books to do the creative U.S. campaign for the 7th Harry Potter book, which was a really big deal for a small shop in Troy, New York at the time.
Yeah.
And we basically worked in secrecy for 6 months because I've never been more scared by a corporate lawyer.
I was going to say, did you have to sign your life away?
He threatened us, it was just kind of subtle, vague threats, but basically you guys will be out of business. And we couldn't tell him what we were doing because the manuscript was so locked down. In fact, not very many people at the publisher had even read it. So they thought people would probably be going through our garbage if they knew we were working on the campaign. And we had no clue what the story was about. We just knew that, what the first 6 books had represented. And we had, an idea of cover art for the 7th. So, I think it varies when you're 9 or 10 people and you're a small boutique agency. You have the advantage, and really, it's kind of nice to be able to scale up slightly for bigger projects, or to be able to work with smaller startups and not have to work 80 hours a week to get some of those things done. So, as much as it would be great to have a large full service agency where if we had media buying and PR departments, we'd probably be more powerful. And there are some clients who say no to us just based on our size, and then go out and hire another agency that gives them 7 or 8 people on the team. So you take the ebb and flows of business and try and make good choices with who you work with. And as we've gotten a little bit more savvy with regard to that, I think it's easier to tell in the first initial meeting or two whether it's a good fit for ID 29.
What are the red flags for you in those first couple meetings? Keywords or concepts that a client might, preconceived notions a client might have, that you kind of put the brakes on and say, maybe this isn't a good fit for us?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's actually one of the things that I think we've gotten quite good at over the years, is kind of identifying what happens in those initial meetings and those initial relationships when you're building them, and figuring out whether it's a good fit or not. Like, if the client uses the term vendor, if we're just a vendor for them and they've looked at other vendors and now they're trying us, if we're flavor of the month, so to speak, then it's probably not a good fit for us. We tend to, I think what's important for us is personal relationships, and if you can get to know the people you're working with, and they want to do a kick-ass job on their end, we want to provide them with great design and creative so they can accomplish their objectives. If they appreciate what we do and they value our opinions and they're not afraid, to ask us difficult questions or to hear difficult answers for us, I think you get a pretty good sense of that in a couple, if in a meeting or two, when you sit down. The caveat to that is occasionally you'll meet with one team, but you find out later that they're not really the decision makers, and that's when I think things can go awry. So you have to do a little bit more exploration.
Right.
Because if the people you're doing the work with don't have the hammer at the end of the day, and you've done a huge suite of work that you think not only meets their objectives but pushes you as a creative firm and also pushes forward their brand and their messaging, and it just gets shot down at the end by the man behind or the woman behind the curtain that you didn't meet originally, then that can be really frustrating. So we try to avoid that. That's not always possible, but you can ask questions that aren't nearly as pointed as that to try and get to the root of, it's great to meet with the VP of marketing, it's great to meet with communications C-level people, but are they the people who are really going to have the final say in what we're able to do for them?
You and your group had released a book a number of years ago, called How to Be a Better Client. And I saw it described as sort of a tongue-in-cheek take on teaching clients how to help you guys be a successful design agency. Can you tell us a little bit of the history of that, just for people who aren't familiar with it?
Yeah, we wanted to do a self-promotional effort for our studio, and we thought making fun of our industry would be maybe a good avenue to try on that. So the book is geared towards making us as comfortable as possible as your potential creative agency. If you have the great fortune of working with us, then we make some suggestions on how to pay your bills early, some gifts that might be appropriate for us, those type of things. So cheeky as far as there's a lot of, I think there's a lot in our industry that is laughable at oftentimes, and if you can't laugh at ourselves, then we're not probably a very good creative agency. So kind of a shot across the bow in our industry, but we make as much fun of ourselves as we do as of our potential clients in that book. And it was just a kind of a narrative and a vehicle to get a few pages of work in the middle out there and in front of people.
Now, did your clients actually read this? And if they did, how did they accept it? What were their reactions to it?
We got some good feedback on that piece, and a few people were mildly offended. And I think maybe that's a bit of a filter to if you're mildly offended by that, then maybe we're not a good fit to work with you. because I didn't think it was that offensive at all. But actually, the audio book I think is as well done as maybe some of the text. My business partner wrote most of the copy in that, and we had a local agency put it together, and the guy's just deadpan. He just rings a little bell and just reads it verse for verse, and sometimes I'll put it on iTunes in the speaker here, and it's still pretty funny 5 or 6 years later.
That's awesome. I read a little bit of a bio from you that talked about, it was actually an interview, I want to say, in Imprint magazine, where they were talking about how you got into design, how you discovered it, and you revealed that you had been going to engineering school, and it just wasn't your bag anymore. And then you took off from there. Can you tell a little bit of that story?
Yeah, I'm going to turn 44 tomorrow, so I've been in this business for thank you. I've been in this business for a while, and I graduated high school in '86. So there weren't a lot of graphic design. In fact, graphic design wasn't even on my radar screen, and I didn't take any art classes in high school. But I was always good, tinkering around the periphery of things. Like I was the one who drew stamps on our hands to get into bars when we needed to duplicate the one guy who had the fake ID and got the stamp, and I would have a set of markers in the car and draw the rest of the stamps and smudge them, and we'd all get in. So not that that's necessarily a design skill, but I was good at that. But our guidance department, I wasn't tracked towards a design career in high school. I was good in math and science. Somehow I ended up in engineering school, and I realized about a year into it that there's just no way I could do this for the rest of my life. I was bored to tears. I was a bad engineering student. And that was actually right up the hill here in Troy. I grew up in Syracuse, ended up coming to school here at RPI in engineering. Great engineering school, but wasn't for me in the late 80s. And nothing like a shot in the arm with regard to, soul searching and career focus when you basically failed out of engineering school and you're working in a bank and going nowhere as a 20-year-old. So I kind of took a look at what I was good at and what I thought I could make a living doing, and went back to school for design and ended up getting an associate's and then a bachelor's, and then I went to grad school as well. I just once I got into it, I just really loved it. I knew it was for me.
You also revealed in that interview that you're colorblind, and you talked a little bit about that. In when you were learning about typography. I'm curious, and the way you phrased that, it really seemed to me that you saw it as a benefit, right? That it gave you a stronger advantage to be able to read certain things that other people couldn't.
I think you play to your strengths when you're a visual designer, and I would also add, Kurt Blueballon and Scott Makula are well-known colorblind designers as well. So I think it's 11% of the men in the world have some type of color deficiency. Mine isn't terrible. I think the best way to describe it, I can see the full spectrum. The way I tell people how to, people think, oh, you're colorblind, you see black and white. That's not accurate at all. The best way to describe it is if you look at a color and you forget the name of it. That's how it kind of manifests itself for me. So sometimes I'll look at the grass and it'll look orange to me. But, I've been alive long enough to know that the grass is probably green. The biggest problem I have as a designer is doing press checks for skin tone.
Yeah.
If there's too much red in someone's face, I have a hard time recognizing that. And if I didn't put sunscreen on one of my kids' faces and they get sunburned, I have a hard time recognizing that as well. So I'm tending to overdo it with the sunscreen. But I heard Doyle Young, the typographer who passed away, I think a year and a half ago, speak once, and he was talking about, he had some slides of some word marks that he had drawn on the screen, and he was talking about in between the letters, and it was black and white, just letters on a screen, and he was talking about the color between the letters. And that really struck me, and I really remembered that as, that's exactly how I see it. It's like, if you unfocus your eyes and look at black and white letter forms, whether you're kerning or doing something, in a font nerd spectrum type of place, that's how I approach that portion of design. So I tend to look at things black and white to begin with, and I tend to add color or texture or those type of things later as necessary. I never start with like I can never do the color wheel, two-dimensional design, like basic tests in college. Like it's, do the tertiary colors, do the secondary colors. I was completely lost.
Yeah.
The colorblind tests that have the dots are terribly infuriating to me. Although I did find one online recently that was an anti-test. Only colorblind people could see the numbers. So I bookmarked that.
Cool.
So that was good. That was the only one that, all the other ones are just dots, and sometimes I can see a number.
It's almost magical in a sense that it's like you have a power to see something that other people can't.
That one time only, though. It was a very short-lived power. Yeah. But if you work,
go ahead.
If you work in a place that has, we have great designers here, so they know, my limitations, and they don't ask me to do things that I can't do, and I confer with them on a regular basis when I need help with things. And also, colored pencils have names on the side. It's and Pantone chips have numbers on them, so it's not like I have a palette and a bunch of oil paints here where I'm mixing things up and trying to do things. There is a science behind color in design.
You guys in the audience didn't catch that. He just mentioned a designer that passed away about a year and a half ago, Doyle Young. If you're not familiar with this guy, look him up. Look up what he accomplished in his life. There's a really great video on lynda.com, the tutorial website, that covers some of what he does and shows how he was a teacher and shows how he would draw some of his letter forms. Really, really amazing stuff. Definitely one of those designers out there that he's going to be very, very missed within the design community, and all the skills and everything and his teaching that he brought. If you're not familiar, guys, look him up, Doyle Young. So you also, where was I going with that? I had another question for you. You guys promote pretty heavily. You mentioned that a minute ago. Your group, you've got a group that's 8 to 10 people, I think you said, and you said you cast a wide net when you do that. Talk a little bit about, instead of going through, mainstream promotion sort of methods, what are the things that your group does that's unique in getting your name out there?
Yeah, I mean, we promote heavily when we promote. Otherwise, oftentimes we can be a little bit quiet when we're busy. We've been busy lately, so new business really isn't, in the forefront of what we're doing. Although one could argue that when you're busy is when you need to promote yourself, because the buying cycle for what we do as a design firm can be 6 months to 18 months. So I think when you look at the way we approach it is not the way that big agencies I can imagine would possibly approach it. We look at who we'd like to work for, who would be the ideal clients, what type of businesses do we want to work with, and then we go and find out who the contact people are there, and we send them personalized things. So when I say cast a wide net, it's like maybe 150 or 200 is a big mailing for us, and it'll usually take 3 or 4 days to put that together, and there's usually a follow-up, and it's usually to the right person, because we're, I think, culling the mailing list for promotional outreach is probably just as important as, well, it's almost equally as important as the design of the piece or the content of the piece, because you can design the hell out of something and send it to the old VP of marketing, and it's going to get, put in the cylindrical filing bin at the company that you're looking for. So as important as it is to keep that database up to speed with regard to who's on it, I think it's also important to have reasonable goals and a reasonable outlook on who you want to work for, the type of capacity you have as an agency, and if you're going to send 15, 20, 30, 100 things out, what if 5 people say yes? What do you do? I mean, be prepared for success if that's the case. That's not always the case, we've found. And we've done 2 books in that series. The first was How to Be a Better Client. The second one was called Slay the Scary Monsters. And it was the same type of thing. We worked with a local illustrator, Michael Oatman, who's kind of a genius here in Troy that I've known for a while and we wanted to work with. And we had similar results with that. Like people like the book, but they're not always looking for a new creative agency at that time. So I think if your goal is to get immediate success and to get the phone ringing the day they received it, I don't think that's a reasonable goal. But if you can keep top of mind awareness for what you're doing, the type of work you're really good at, And if people can think of you as a creative outlet when they do get to that point where maybe we have a new VP of marketing, we need to switch agencies, or maybe we need some help with this creatively, who should we call? I mean, if that book is, snarky enough, memorable enough, distinctive enough, whatever it is you're doing, a book or a printed piece or something digital, if it's good enough to be remembered and it's on the top of the stacks, then you have an advantage over some of the other stuff that maybe they've got.
Sure.
So my approach is do it well, send it to the right people, and then follow up. Mailing it away and then not following up is, you might as well just give it away. You might as well just dump your money and go to the bar and spend it on something else, because I think you're wasting your money from a promotional standpoint if you're creating beautiful things and then not having the due diligence to go and follow up with people and just call them up and say, look, even if you get their voicemail, I sent you this. We're hoping we're going to be in your town in 3 weeks. We're hoping we can get a meeting. Even if you're bullshitting, you're not going to be in their town. If it's that important to you, you could certainly be in their town in 3 weeks. If that's the type of client that you think would be important enough to make a trip for. So sometimes we segment the mailings. We'll mail a certain number of pieces to a certain geography and try and set up, take a day or two in Boston and New York and Philadelphia and set up meetings there and see if we can get 3 or 4 clients just to sit down, have coffee, have a beer, and talk about what they're doing and how we might be able to help them. And yeah, is it a turkey shoot? Sure it is. But if you're careful about who you're dealing with and who you're sending it to, and if you can stay on their radar, it's worked out a little bit for us, and we don't need 10 new clients. We need 1 or 2 because of our size.
It also seems like you're active in promoting yourself within the design community, not necessarily by promoting yourself, but by reaching out and participating, especially in upstate New York. You guys have been part of the AIGA and stuff like that. Talk a little bit about your involvement locally with your design community.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and we have a really strong design community here in upstate New York. And shout out to Paul Stonier, I see, who is part of that community, who was logged in here in the chat window from Horseheads New York. Thank you, Paul.
And credit to Paul for throwing your name out there, and he was really active in trying to get you on Design Chat. So thank you, Paul, for that.
Well done, Paul. Yeah, I think what's interesting about upstate New York, and we have an AIGA chapter that spans basically from Westchester to Messina to Buffalo to Albany to the Southern Tier. So it's the entire state of New York, which is half the population. So we have geographic challenges. And without, I think what's interesting is when you leave design school, you have this great tight-knit community of designers and mentors and people that you can bounce ideas off of and people you can go grab a drink or go to a film with or go to an art opening. And I think when people start working, if they're not in a really tight urban community that has a lot of events, you really have to go and make your community active. And we've had some great success in the last couple of years just doing a little bit of programming via upstate New York AIGA in our area just to get people to come out and come out to different speakers, come out to events. We put together some local gallery shows now in Albany in particular last year that was really the first graphic design show that was done in Albany at the Albany Center Gallery. So I think it's been great getting people out, and I think that people have the same idea. It's like, you know what, I haven't had this type of discussion with another designer who I didn't work with 8 hours a day in a long time. Yeah. Sometimes it's, the nuances of font nerdiness, and sometimes it's like, what do you think of the Yankee game last night? It's like, so it's, if you can mix your social life in with, what your work interests are and extend it a little bit and build a community where, you can meet people. And there's a lot of overlap with some of the other organizations like the Ad Club, and we do a social media breakfast thing here as well. So we get people from not necessarily graphic designers, but people from advertising, people from gaming, entrepreneurs who are out there involved with designers. And so not only does it, from a social standpoint, does it kind of add to add to the culture, but it's also good for designers. It's good for designers to go out and meet people who are in incubators who are coming out with new products who need designers who don't necessarily want to, open the phone book or search online. So particularly for younger designers who are trying to, gain a foothold in the community and just get their name out there a little bit, I think it's been useful for them as well.
That brings us to our first question from the audience, who, oddly enough, this question comes from somebody who's going to be our guest on the show next week. Let me just bring it up here. From Mitch Goldstein, wants to know, AIGA has been getting lots of critique from designers lately. How do you see their role in the future?
Well, I always use the word we and not they, Mitch, when I speak of AIGA, of course, because it is just a group of people, and I know you know that, and I know you're probably typing away right now, correcting me. I think when there's criticism, there's usually a success followed by that. If there were crickets, then if people aren't paying attention, if people aren't riled up by things, then that's probably more of a problem than there would be if there is criticism. And maybe there have been some controversial things done by AIGA National that has ruffled some feathers. Maybe some contests have been discontinued or changed or those type of things. But at the end of the day, I mean, AIGA for me is about our local design community and how it affects us and the kind of change we can exact here locally. So I realize there's a national organization, and I'm glad there is. I think they've done a good job helping define a set of goals for the 66 chapters, I think, now that exist. At the same time, I'm not an AIGA homer. I'm not going to sit here and say that some of the controversy isn't warranted, but at the same time, I think it's like a really good piece in design. If no one's talking about it, if no one's pissed off by it, then it's probably not very successful. They're over on the other side now.
That's how I roll. I like to switch it up, man. So yeah, I mean, I've got to comment on that a little bit too, just because from where I live and a little bit in overlap in the last piece of the conversation, I'm outside of Chicago. I'm like an hour and a half outside of Chicago. So there are definitely time constraints in getting together and being face-to-face with an organization like that, AIGA or STA or something like that. And honestly, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I started doing Design Chat, is because I felt a lack after school. I felt a lack of connectivity. Designers, as far as social media goes, it seems we're sort of fickle. We might be on this platform for a little while, and then it's not cool, and then we're on that platform for a little while, and then that's not cool. And sometimes it's hard to follow conversations. Honestly, the best conversations I've ever seen have been on some of Armin Witt's websites in a blog post, just in the comments, and that's where you get the really juicy stuff, the arguments, I think you're wrong about this because X, Y, and Z. And sometimes it's not the easiest thing to get together with a big group of people. And I've got to agree that on the side of AIGA, it's better that there are people bitching about things and being worked up rather than the crickets. I mean, you're just not. There's nothing interesting. If there's nothing to talk about, there's nothing to talk about, and why have an organization at all? So it's one of those things, you can't please everybody all the time. There are too many broad types of people with broad interests designing for many different reasons, and it's not like everybody's going to agree on everything all the time and have this pure, unique design utopian society.
Yeah, Mitch just left a comment that he misses Speak Up, and Speak Up was great, I think, because people use their real names, and that's a fine line, I think, in today's social media. But at the same time, when people are authentic and passionate about what they do, and they're willing to have a belief or an opinion and stand behind it, then I think you have real discourse. And I think that Speak Up did a great job with kind of igniting people's passions, and whether you were arguing the merits of some wacky logo redesign that maybe had no bearing on your life at all, or whether it was reacting to someone's reaction about that. Yeah, the threads to those boards, I think, and a lot of them are still archived, are really interesting. And there are a lot of people who, who lived and died by it, who are really, very active commenters, and just go through, and occasionally someone would chime in. And when it's your real name, you get to know them a little bit. You don't really get to know them, personally. But if you follow someone via social media, and for me, that kind of preceded the explosion of Twitter and the design community. So getting to know people's commenting behavior on certain things on that site and on Design Observer and some of the other ones, I think it's a lot more timely than reading reviews in design books or in the design rags, because it's 10 minutes ago, not 10 months ago.
Sorry, I'm just texting back. I told you earlier we were having some issues with the screen capture. I'm just making sure something's taken care of. Just 1 second. Just in case. What's something that that's getting you worked up right now? What's something that's happening in, whether it's design community or a logo that just came out for, like a Fortune 500 company that really sucks? What's something that's getting you fired up right now?
What am I fired up about? Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not. I think I've been in this business enough to not get offended by, visually by either intentional or accidental mistakes in identity design the way I used to when I was 22 or 23, and just wanted to go outside and scream at something. Particularly when one of my favorite brands would. Well, here's an example. I couldn't use Miracle Whip the other day because I just hate the new identity. So I was at a party and it's like, "You want some Miracle Whip?" Said, "Let me see the package." "No, I'm not going to use this." And it was maybe a little snobby on my part, and I'm not a big fan of that product anyways. But I mean that glyph, it's terrible. So it's like I won't buy it. And then conversely, I buy a bunch of crappy wine because I'm drawn in by the typography, and I get it home and I open it up and it's like.
It's horrible.
It's like I just wasted $12, but the label is so awesome. So I think anyone who's into design probably gets sucked into that vortex from time to time. I see there's things that are done, I think, in social media that are irritating, and much like some of the things that other people are railing against. I think whenever privacy is concerned, that tends to irritate me. Facebook switching your email to a Facebook email is like. Very minor little things, but what are you doing?
Yeah.
Every day I feel like I'm one step closer to just absolutely quitting that platform. But I say that about every platform every day. It's like, it's a medium, and it's interesting, and maybe I'm a little ADHD, so I like it. It definitely affects the amount of work I get done, but it's become such a part of my process and interaction that I could probably work a little bit longer and get the same amount of work done and not have certain windows open, then close them all. I try this, intentionally. I try to close windows and get things done. And 3 minutes later, I have the window back open, messing around or whatever.
But it's like the cross section of like when you see a product that has an awesome design, awesome branding, and the product itself is really, it's designed well and functions well, or the wine tastes really good. When those two things happen at the same time, that's instantaneous love, right? It's the same thing for like social media platforms. If you sign up for a service and you kind of dink around, you upload some photos, and you're not really engaging, but then boom, that conversation happens. That person comments on a website that you're familiar with, and all of a sudden it strikes a chord, and all of these ideas explode, and there's conversation, and people are joining in. That's a sweet spot, right? When the platform works and the connectivity works at the same time, it makes it that much more valuable to the people who are using it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And, it's a real delicate balance. Like, you could design the hell out of any type of software, any type of social media platform. One misstep, one miscue, and people are going to bail. Yeah. I think that's a little bit different. If you design a better corkscrew and market the hell out of it, and it looks good and it works well, chances are it's going to be successful. I think there's, to some degree, the technology is moving so fast in that realm that I think it's hard to stay in front of the curve, and it's hard to stay in front of the curve as a designer, as a developer, as as someone who tracks that. It's also hard to stay even with, or just to be able to float as a consumer, because I get inundated with, and I'm sure you do, and everyone else does. It's like, join this network. You got a request to join? It's like, no. In fact, I already have too many networks I'm involved with, and I want to peel that back a little bit. And, I don't take it that seriously, and I think some people do. And and I think it's your job to take it seriously. Then that's your job, and you should take it seriously. For me, I find it somewhat funny, a little bit, and I tend to use it as more of a comical relief than I do as a way to meet and interact with people and call a new business, those type of things. But I think everyone has their own method to use whatever social media platform they're using, and I don't think there are any really right or wrong answers other than what's really really bad. But at the same time, I think it's really difficult to follow professional athletes or celebrities on this. I can't believe the number of followers that some of them have, and then to read how uninteresting and really the lack of content that they're generating and the number of people who are following it is a little bit disheartening for someone who generates as much content as I possibly can from a design standpoint, and I'm not able to reach the 1/10 of 1% of the people that they're doing.
So if Miracle Whip is out, what's in? So if the product pissed you off that much, where it's like, I don't want to participate in that, what's the one thing that you love? What is that?
It's water in a Fuller's glass. Yeah, I should probably have a Fuller's in a Fuller's glass. We're above a brew pub here in Troy.
Really? How do you get anything done?
It's difficult sometimes, but not only, well, we're kind of next to the brew pub, but they're building a Rathskeller in our basement for craft beer and single malt. So we're looking forward to that's 2 floors down from us. So we're believers in that brand. We helped with the rebranding a few years ago. So as much as we aspire to be an international or a national or a regional design company, sometimes the best clients are literally next door. And so we have Skype meetings with people and phone calls and emails with people. We have clients, our biggest clients in California. But I'd much rather go down to the bar and have a business meeting with Gary Brown from Brown's Brewing Company and talk about his new products and those type of things. So location. You got it nailed. So there's I don't think you can't put past the local meeting with the local client that you can exact change with and do great things with, and also better the community. So we've met people just because they wanted to find out who did the rebranding for the oldest brew pub in the area, and it was us here upstairs. So that was, I think there's an extra level of satisfaction you get as a designer when you've worked on something local and people recognize it. And maybe it's not as lucrative as worked on something national and people recognize it, but there's something to be said for the local. And so we'll always have local clients, regardless of who we're working with.
I want to remind people that we take questions from the audience. We've got about 15 more minutes left in the chat. You submit a question by clicking on the red Ask a Question button on the right side of your screen, and you can type it in, or if you've got a webcam, please get on camera and join us. We've got another question from the wonderful Mitch Goldstein. I'm not sure what the context is, but he asks, Mass Mocha is one of my favorite places on earth. Do I have you to thank for that? I have no idea what that means.
Mass Mocha is the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art, and that was my first design job out of grad school. As a matter of fact, I graduated from Cranbrook on a Friday in May of 1995, and the following Monday, I brought my own Mac to the offices of Mass Mocha, and as an employee number 2, I started working on the identity design for a potential museum, which 6 months after the first day I started working there, was either going to get canned from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and totally canceled as a new governor, William Weld, took over, or it was going to get approved by the state of Massachusetts, and I would actually have a job and get a paycheck for the first time. So fortunately, things worked out, and 6 months after I started working there, I got a paycheck, and the museum got certified. So I spent 4 years in advance of the opening for that museum, doing basically all the graphic design and identity and signage and wayfinding for Mass MoCA, and then I spent 4 years after the opening doing very similar activities for the programming. So we had a great team. If you like the roof sign and some of the printed stuff and the website, then yeah, you can thank me for that later, Mitch, if I'm your beer. But the real brain trust of that project was Joe Thompson, who came out of Williams College Museum of Art with Michael Govan, who's now the director of the Dia Center for the Arts, and their boss was Thomas Krenz, the former director of the Guggenheim. So they had really the vision to see a mothballed 27-acre mill campus in North Adams, which is right next to Williamstown in Massachusetts, kind of the upper left-hand corner of Massachusetts if you're looking at it on a map. They had the potential to turn that into a contemporary art museum. The wherewithal to pull that off and be able to stick through that project from the original charrette to the opening in 1999 was just incredible. I was there for the ride. It was pretty easy for me having a blank slate and being a very idealistic young designer who just got out of grad school and handed the keys to the design kingdom at Mass MoCA to help promote and build the visual identity and help build some of the design culture around that thing was really a lot of fun. But getting that project off the ground, it took a lot of people, and that was just fun.
That's awesome. That's awesome. We've got a video call here from Paul Stonier. Let's bring him on. Friend of Marco also. Feedback. But go ahead and ask your question, Paul.
You guys, so a little bit for both you guys, because I know with Ryan, he's had to put Design Chat on hold a little bit with his life getting crazy with the baby on the way and enjoying his new fatherhood. And I've had to put my AIGA involvement off to the side a little bit because of my daughter. So Doug, how do you manage to stay so involved in the community and do all the cool stuff that you do while still having a life?
That's a really good question. I've actually had to pare back a lot of my extracurricular activities just to be able to handle. I've got 3 kids that vary in age from 9 to 15, so a little bit older, and they get a little bit easier with regard for some things, but then it becomes a little bit harder because you have to drive them around at the same time. So I think for me, being a husband and a father comes first, and then working at a design firm and trying to do stuff locally in our design community comes second. You definitely need to keep your priorities straight. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is, there's an ebb and flow to involvement in organizations and client work for design firms and those type of things. So if the economy's good, then you're busy. If the economy's not so good, you're not busy. If you can get involved with something, you don't need to be full bore, 24/7, working like crazy to get stuff done. I think you can, if you try and find what would work for you, what a goal is. Maybe that goal is to go to 2 or 3 things in the fall or a spring. That's probably fine. I think if you look at it more of a marathon than a sprint, it's easier to kind of quantify how involved you want to get, and what level of success or what level of failure you're willing to accept. I think the only way to really quantify that for your own self is to go through it. And people can tell you should do this so many times a month to stay involved with this, and you can go and try it. And maybe after 3 or 4 months, you realize that that's too much, or maybe that's not enough. So I had enough years of experience in being involved in local organizations and local boards in our area. When people ask me to do things, it's like, I'd love to help you, but I can't because I wouldn't be able to do it at 100%. So, and that's really the other thing. It's like, if you're going to do it half-assed, then don't do it, right? Because then people are going to be depending upon you for stuff, and you're not going to be able to deliver. And that's the same with work. if you take the same approach, I think, to the seriousness of your design work that you do to your interaction with the design community, that you do the interaction with organizations or public groups that might want your help, then to be successful. So trying to juggle, I mean, you're going to juggle or you're not, or the balls are going to hit the floor. You can't have it both ways. So my advice would be, do what you need to do with your family, because that's first and foremost the most important thing. Keep your job alive, and if you can get re-engaged when, I'll tell you, a 7-year-old is a lot easier than a 3-year-old. And that seems, 4 years sounds like a long time, but 4 years is nothing. So maybe you get re-engaged after, but then when they turn from 7 to 11, then, then the nightmare begins all over again. So it's like you got to deal with an 11-year-old. So there's always going to be issues. I wouldn't trade it for the world. But I think as your priorities change as a parent or as a husband or a wife, then I think if you can fit things in that are important to you and you can do them properly and do them right and not, and be able to carve out the time to do them, then at least that's the way I approach it, and it seems to work out. It's very tiring. I'm not going to lie to you. It's long hours at work and long hours with the family. But if you love what you do and if your family life is great, then it doesn't feel like work.
Right. Great pieces of advice, I think, for both myself and Paul, because I think Paul and I are in similar situations where we've just sort of expanded our families, and we desperately want to be part of the design community and be active and go to events and stuff. But maybe at this point it's time to hold back a little bit and re-engage when we can. And I think that's definitely something I'm going through right now. So I can connect with you there, Paul. Cool, man. Well, thanks for coming on and suggesting Doug be a guest and asking a question. Much appreciated, man.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Paul.
Cool.
Talk to you later. Cool. All right, we've got about 5-10 minutes left in the chat, guys. This is your last opportunity to get questions in if you want to do so, video or text or otherwise. One other piece of work that you guys did that got a lot of coverage was the 29 Things Young Designers Need to Know. Definitely I remember seeing that when it first came out and digging through. I think its original form was a poster, and there were all these squares that looked like they're perforated, and each one of the squares had sort of a shortly written tip on the front and then longer explanation on the back, and they were all very sort of ground level. These are things you need to do to be a successful designer kind of thing. Can you tell a little bit of history on that and sort of your viewpoint now that it's been a little time has passed?
Yeah, that was a piece that I really put together as a personal project based on a lot of the feedback and a lot of the questions that design students have asked me over the years. And we have 3 or 4 really strong programs, design programs here in our area. And we have the students through once or twice a semester from the different programs, and I'll sit down and have a back and forth discussion, maybe show them some work and just talk about where they're going, or visit some of their critiques with some of the instructors that I know here. And I found that after 5 or 6 years of this, that not surprisingly, students have the same questions because they're about to graduate, and they're not in the situation that I wasn't in 20 years ago, where I have no idea what I'm going to want to do. We had a much more difficult time locating potential employers without the magic internet, which spoon feeds these kids where to go and where to apply, and you can just follow Twitter job listing and be given coordinates or who's actually looking for designers. 20 years ago it was really difficult to do. So a lot of the questions that I got asked were questions that I had, and so putting together this piece was more of a collection of some of my notes on some of their questions over the years, and I just trying to answer them in kind of a brief format. And I love poster design, so poster seemed like a good format. Writing long form copy is like pulling teeth for me. I'll do it if I have to, and it usually makes me better as a writer to sit down and do it. But 150 words times 29 was better than 40,000 words. And also, I think a lot of those points are it's not groundbreaking, but it was more of a collection of, I was trying to be authentic to the questions that I've been asked, just trying to answer them rather than to come up with 29 unique points of view. Some of that stuff's been covered before, but that's maybe my personal take on some of those questions.
Sure. And answers. Well, I remember thinking to myself that those are great things for young designers too, but also for designers who have been working for 5, 10 years, maybe even, and maybe they've lost some of their way from their direction from when they were young, and maybe don't have the same passion, the amount of passion for what they do anymore. And it's sort of like a great refresher. For me, I saw clarity in it. They're very short, simple ideas, but they're very true ideas at the same time.
Yeah, I think you can't put enough emphasis on how incredible the idealism of a young, passionate design student is coming out of school. I mean, they just have, the world's their oyster. I was the same way. I was just wanted to go out and just design everything, and get a great job and be successful. And so for me, trying to, and that's funny because people have come back to me and said, "Oh, I've been doing this for 25 years, and I really enjoyed some of it." And I didn't write it for them at all. I wrote it trying to think of, myself as a younger designer and some of the students that we interact with. But I think if you take a look at, the good things about being a young designer is the passion and the energy and, the willingness to go the extra mile to do the right thing. You're right. That can wane over the years, being beat down in corporate jobs or those type of things. So if some people read that who had been in it for a while and get maybe a little bit inspired, then I think that's great.
I think that brings us to the end of our chat for tonight. I just want to remind everybody you can find out who the next guest is going to be on Design Chat by going to designchat.info/upcoming. Next week is Mitch Goldstein. He's here in the chat participating. That's awesome. Can't wait to talk to him next week. Very much looking forward to seeing more of what ID29 does in the future. Doug, thank you so much for coming on. Much appreciated, and that's all.
Thank you, Ryan. Look forward to next week.
Definitely. Good night, everybody in the chat room. Talk to you guys soon. Yeah, put up your Twitter name so everybody can follow everybody, and we'll talk to you guys soon.